kind of a career profile. So while I was in school at BYU doing my undergrad, I got a job like everyone, just living in an apartment with roommates, and I got a job at a place called Marketing Ally, and they were a contact center, and it was just an hourly job, just make some money, hit the bills, and from working there, I started on the phones, and then as a supervisor, I kind of moved over to account management. And as I was going through school, I thought I would do something in business, which I did do, but I thought I would do more international business. I'm fluent in Spanish, maybe not anymore, functional in Spanish now. And I thought that's the direction I would go. But as I started working while I was in college, I started to see which seems like an obvious thing now, but it wasn't so much 25 years ago, kind of a gap between information technology and business, and how those two groups talk to each other to make a business function. And so I switched my major to management information systems, and went through that and got close to graduating. And at that time, it's probably similar here at SLCC, maybe it is, I don't know. But at BYU, they would bring in recruitment. So companies would come into the school to hire people, and you literally can sign up to meet with them and interview for the job postings they have. And obviously, as the economy ebbs and flows, that can be more activity or less activity. I was, it's better to be lucky than good, I would say. It was a lucky time for me to be graduating at that moment. The amount of companies that were coming to hire was huge. So I literally, you just signed up for interviews and then went to the appointment and interviewed for the job. And then you would go to subsequent interviews, sometimes fly to different areas to meet at headquarters and then see where that led. So I interviewed with 18 companies that I literally just signed up for and got 17 job offers. So that sounds great, and it is, but it is very much economy driven. The next year, the same graduates were having a hard time getting interviews. So you can imagine I had these 17 offers, right? Some were low, some were high, some were attractive to me, some weren't. And I was going through the decision of what, which one do you pick, right? You're all over the country, potentially living, different various jobs. And it kind of, for me, came down to Intel in Oregon. It was a good offer for, I think, something I'd be interested in and felt I'd be good at. And staying at this rinky-dinky company that I was working for in Provo while I was going to school. We had grown a ton while I had gone to school, and at that time, by the time I graduated, I think I'd worked up to be, the vice president of IT. And ultimately, I decided to stay at this rinky-dinky company, right, instead of going to Intel. So you might say, well, why would you do that? I knew that at Intel, I would have opportunities, but I would be a minnow in the ocean. And I knew at the company in Provo that was small and growing, I would be a bigger fish in a small pond. So why does that matter? It's not an ego thing. I knew that that company would let me do things that at my station in life, I probably, I had no business doing, right? I had no business being involved with those types of decisions. I had no experience with it, but I knew where they were headed, and I knew kind of the lane I had carved out there. And so I made that decision, which was hard, to stay at that company. It was much smaller, less probably opportunities from the outside looking in. But I figured, hey, I'm going to be involved with things that I might not have an opportunity in my career to do for a decade. So I made that decision, and that worked out well. We kept growing. Eventually, I was probably the director of IT when I graduated. Anyway, by the time we got done there, I think I was the vice president of IT. And me and the vice president of operations basically ran that business and reported to the founder at the time. Now, is it all unicorns and rainbows? No, it's not. That business eventually, through a series of entrepreneurs are great, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but they're not detailed people. And some decisions were made that ran that business a little bit into the ground, and we had to actually close it. So then I had the experience of we were acquired by another company and then actually shut down. So then I had to go through the experience of shutting down a business and ramping down all of the liabilities and laying off all the staff and contacting customers. So that sounds horrible, but actually looking back, it was a great experience. But that job did let me do things that that I wouldn't have otherwise done at that station. So I then went to work for a company called Data Services Direct, and at the time there was Cross. I think I started as the vice president of IT, and eventually was the CIO. I was the first job I was there for like 7 or 8 years. The second job was probably 14 years. At the second job, I took that job for a lower salary with a compensation package that included equity. So one of the points I wanted to make is you don't have to start a business to be an entrepreneur, right? People like to have this mold of entrepreneurship, and you have to mortgage your house and burn the boats, and that's for sure that happens. But there's only so many people doing that, and there's only so many people willing to do that. But you can be entrepreneurial, you can act as an entrepreneur, and honestly, you can have success and make a bunch of money like an entrepreneur without actually starting a business. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Back to my first job and my second job, I'll say this. Here's a piece of advice I'd give you. Don't worry in the beginning a lot about your compensation. Just go work your butt off. Just go work your butt off. Look around, keep your head up. What needs to be done? No one gets upset by people solving problems, whether it was your job or not. I never worried about it. I worked all the time. Now, when you're hourly, you're getting compensated for that. But I quickly became salary at the first job, but I kept that attitude. I worked nights, I worked weekends, I worked tons of hours. And mind you, I was going to school full time. But I did the same thing at the second job as well. Now, people would see me doing that. Even my brother at Pac-Man, I remember him making a comment like, "Oh, if those specials aren't going to pay me, I'm not going to work, whatever." I was like, "Well, hey, man, to each his own. You can do that." But I never took that approach. And you typically don't get the positions you want and earn the compensation you want before you put in the work to earn that. So I always counted it as paying for that education and that experience. If something needed to be done and I was out of time, I would do it at night and I would knock it out and I would progress those businesses and solve problems. And whether or not I was technically being paid or not, I always looked at it like, you know, I'm paying to get that education and that opportunity, and it has always paid back and propelled me in my career with both career advancement and compensation. Let's see here. So when I joined Data Services Direct, we were small. So to give you an idea about Marketing Ally, let's see. When I started there, I think we were about 3 million in revenue, and 7 years later, we were at 15. So it's it gives you an idea of that growth. When I joined DSD, they were about 3 million as well, but growing, smaller, and they were pretty much break even. And then after a year there, I went back to start my MBA, so 2 years of that. Right after my MBA, we ended up merging with a company in Philadelphia, right? So lots of times mergers don't work, but this one worked well. And we rebranded the company and named it MetaSource. And that's actually still a going concern today. I actually just exited that officially, liquidating my stock in there, my equity, last year. So I was there for 14 years. And we went from about 3 million to about 60. So we did this merger right after I graduated with my MBA. And then ran that for a couple of years, kind of integrated the businesses. And then we had about a 9-year stint where we did 17 acquisitions. So that's a lot of acquisitions in that amount of time, in 7 years, 9 years, something like that. You get really good at it. So what's the great thing about doing those acquisitions? So to give you an idea of the numbers, if you buy 17 companies, that means to some degree, we probably looked at 300 companies, right? A large percentage of acquisitions fail. Either that company ends up getting spun off, or it hurts the original business, or you lose money on it. Every single business we acquired was beneficial. It was accretive, as they say. We brought them in, and we improved their margins, and we grew with them. So the great thing about that is I got the opportunity to learn all of those businesses and quickly be able to assess how do they run that business, what's good and what's bad. And I always took the attitude of, okay, we're buying them, so we can bang our chest and we're the best. Or you can say, okay, what is it that they're doing that we're not doing? What is it, this one thing that's good, some vendor they use, some process they have, some culture they use, look for that and then try to integrate it into the main core business. So that was a great experience to go through that and to integrate all of those businesses. We bought businesses in Texas, in California, in Philadelphia, in Denver. I flew a lot, but it was a grind. It was a great experience. So talking about that grind, what's one thing you hear about entrepreneurs? They both have the ability, but I would say that's the minority of it, but they have the willingness to grind, right? They're not going to be told no. They're going to grind, they're going to grind, they're going to grind. And almost every time the business they start, if it becomes successful, looks very different than the one they started, than the one they thought they were going to do. They learn, they meet, they decide what the market wants, they adjust, they change, and they end up doing something very different. But it's because they grind, they're just relentless. So as you can imagine, finding these companies and integrating them, along with just running your own business, you just have to grind all the time. So I worked all the time. So don't get me wrong, you need to have a work-life balance, and that becomes more important, I think, to different generations. And that is true. Work-life balance is very important. But there is an aspect of being willing to put in the time and put your head down and just go through it. Let's see. One company we bought that was interesting, it's called Capture Resources. That doesn't matter. They're actually down the street from our office in Philadelphia. They were, let's see, I don't know, I can't remember. Maybe they were $6 million a year in revenue, and they were losing money, like $300-400 grand a month, month after month after month. And they looked very similar to our business. And we went in and we made them an offer because they were very similar to our business. We felt like we could integrate them. What we thought was a fair offer, right? And they kind of laughed at it a little bit. So now we're going to pass. 9 months later, they came back and said, hey, will you still buy us? So I think the lesson there is like, you try to put emotion aside and be as logical as you can and kind of stick to your guns. So we bought that company, and in the first month we owned them, right, they had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, month after month after month, for a while. The first month we owned them, we broke even. The next month we owned them, we made a profit. And within 6 to 8 months, we had their margins where they should have been at about 20% margin. Now, so geez, how'd you do that? We did that time after time after time. And I remember talking to my partners as we did this, and we bought these companies thinking, and we would say to each other, literally, what is going on? Like, I don't feel like we're that smart. What, like they could have solved this problem, right? But after like doing a dozen of those, like I remember turning to my one partner, like, maybe we're that smart. And what I realized was, maybe we're smart, that's probably true, but we had a willingness to grind. We had a willingness to do the hard work. We had a willingness to face things on head first and make a hard decision, where lots of these things just get put off. The one company I was telling you about, the CEO was a good guy, but they had this pet project, and I'll spare you the details, and they just could not make it work. So at face value, I thought it was kind of dumb, but I suspended my disbelief. I was like, okay, well maybe he's onto something. So let's look at the business model. And he had this Excel spreadsheet that had like projected revenues and costs and how it would run and what he thought the margin would be at the end. And it should be profitable according to this model and the revenue they have and what their cost structure was. So like, okay, let's dive into it, right? So I'm diving through the spreadsheet, tab after tab after tab, linked cells, formulas into formulas into formulas. And I'm just pounding through it, right? Because you got to figure it out. And it wasn't working right. I'm like, God, this is a weird model. And no matter how I changed the inputs, it was always profitable. So then I started going to the extremes. What if you cut revenue in half and you sort out your costs? It's still profitable. And this is what they were running it on. And I was like, what is going on? So then I'm diving deeper and I'm diving deeper and I'm looking through these formulas. And what I found was that they had hard-coded gross margin. So no matter what you put in there, that's a profitable business. And they were running it that way. So I'm not like trying to like scare you, but that's not that uncommon. So another thing I would say is, when you see people that are successful and the CEO of a company, I'm sure he was a smart guy and he worked hard and he knew people and he had some experience. But never think that they're like the king on the hill. So that doesn't mean that we're not tactful and respectful, of course not. But never think that they're the king on the hill and just fall in line. I have never taken that approach. I have had lots of times where people said, well, we're going to do this because so-and-so said to do it. The CEO, the president, the COO, some executive, even though that's a stupid idea. I've never done that. I take the approach where I say to that person, listen, I bet you if that person had the information that you have, they might make a different decision. Or potentially they have some information that you don't have, and that's why they're making that decision. So you got to bridge that communication gap. But never, I would just say, try not to fall in line with like, well, I just do it because the guy said to do it, or that must be right because he's the CEO. The best business leaders realize that no one person is as smart as we all are, right? Everybody who works for me, I expect them to be able to do things better than I can do. Otherwise, I don't need them. And that's not a threat to me. That's a team, right? So, we fixed that model and divested ourselves of that business. And that was emotionally painful for them. But in the end, all those jobs were saved and that business started to grow and we started to find success. Let's see. Can you let me know when I'm like running out of time?
Yeah, so.
Oh, I got a clock right there.
You got plenty of time. So go to about like, hopefully like another 10, 15 minutes. Okay. And then let them ask questions.
Great.
And we just end 10-2.
Okay.
And that's usually a great spot.
Perfect. Okay.
You're doing awesome.
Great. Well, I'm doing. Let's see. So while at MetaSource, we grew from about 3 million to about 60 million over 14 years. We brought on some mezzanine debt, which is just a type of debt, and then we brought on private equity, right? So that got me in this private equity cycle. So let me talk about that at a high level. So private equity is a bunch of people with a lot of money, put it in the pool, and then they go talk to other people and institutions with a lot of money, they put it in the pool, and then they go out and buy businesses. So to be clear, it still confuses my mother, but so when we became private equity backed, that doesn't mean they own 100% of the business. They own a controlling share, so 51% plus, but they've invested in the business. Often that group has connections and other companies they've bought that then you can network together. And then when we went on the acquisition spree, they had the capital and the banking relationships to help us have the money to go do that and kind of the support. And so, but when you take private equity money, the whole point is for them to put money in and then take more money out. So your goal now is you're on this treadmill, this 3 to 6 year treadmill where you need to grow the business to a certain point where they can exit. And often you'll hear that called recapitalizing. It's a fancy word for some other private equity company who's bigger, buys out their position, and then generally pays the management their options, right, their incentives to grow the business. And the private equity group makes a bunch of money, the management individually makes some money, and then the new investor invests, and then you keep going, and you have to grow again for the next 3 to 6 years until you recapitalize or sell it to somebody else or potentially go public. So we're on this treadmill of doing that every 3 to 6 years, and we successfully recapitalize on time several times every time. Let's see. So I ended there as Chief Information Officer. I served for a time in operations as the COO. I did both for a while, which was a hard year until we decided which way to go, and then we hired an operations person. And then after recapitalizing several times and kind of seeing that growth, I decided it was time. Me and a partner decided to leave, and we exited the business. We still had some equity, but we decided, hey, we're going to go and do some consulting. And we had some ideas for some businesses we started to try to start. Now, you might say, oh, you are an entrepreneur. You were going to start businesses. Okay, so here's the difference. Entrepreneurs put their house on the line when they have no other option. And like, they got to grind and make it work. If you make a bunch of money, then you start a business, you can call yourself an entrepreneur, but you have a safety net. Often the reason entrepreneurs are successful is because they have no alternative. So they just work and work and work and work until they're successful. So as we started to do this, out of the blue, I had a buddy call me at a company called K&S International. And I think he knew I was kind of transitioning out of my old business and said, hey, we got some issues we've been trying to solve, it's not going well. Can you come in and just look at it? I was like, great. Customer number one, let's do consulting. I told my partner, hey, and he was a buddy, and I usually, so this is, you'll see the theme. What I told him, which I would have done anyway, but he's a buddy, I said, hey, listen, I'll come in for a week and I'll talk to everybody and I'll put a plan together for free. And I'll just present it. This is what I would do. If you like the plan and you think that's the way you want to go, then we can work on an engagement and you can contract with us and we'll help you put that plan in place. So you might say, well, geez, that's a lot of work for a week talking to everybody. What if they don't do it? Yeah, they might not. But what I find every single time is that you give a little, it takes down their defenses, they see you as a good guy, and they want to work with you. So I did that. I went in, I interviewed almost everyone in the business. I put a deck together, hey, this is what I would do. I've seen this a lot, right? Because I had this experience of buying all these companies. So I was really good at going in quickly and assessing all the areas and how, what are the big holes? How do we get there? And I did this presentation. And I presented to the founder and the CEO, and he said, okay, all that looks great. How about, we basically said, how about we just stop this and I hire you and you do it? I said, no, I don't want to do that. Thanks, I'm flattered, that's great. I got a partner, we're starting this business, we have some other customers we're already working with. I think we can help you through a consulting agreement. I can even help, find people to hire and interview and put them in our place when we transition out, and you'll be okay. And he said, no, I want you. And my mistake was, he said, listen, just don't say no. And I said, okay. And he said, go home and think about it, and then send me an email with what it would take. And just agree to that. And I said, okay. Thinking, I'm not doing this. So I went home, I talked to my partner, I thought about it, and so I said, okay, I don't really want to do this. I kind of want to do the things we're doing. We had a kind of a business idea going, we were doing consulting with some other companies. So a couple of days later, I sent him an email. And so I was like, I don't want to do this. So, right, here's what it would take. Pay, bonus, equity, blah, 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 blah. And then I got a reply that said, sounds good, when can you start? I was like, I told my wife, I said, I think I have to take this job. And so after kind of mulling that around a little bit, I decided, okay, I talked to my partner, I told him, hey, sorry, we're gonna do this. He said, hey, bygones, no problem. He's successful, he's doing some other stuff. And that's how I found K&S. So does that happen all the time? No, but I worked hard for free. I was lucky to be in some situations where I had the opportunity to work on stuff that was above my pay grade. So I got to learn those lessons. All those acquisitions were accretive, but let me be clear, we messed up a lot. We learned a lot, but we quickly adjusted and made fixes and learned those lessons. And on the next business, we did it different. And then the mistakes we made on the next one, I learned. On the next one, I did it different. So by the time I ground through that for 14 years, to have this opportunity where I'm at now, I would say at this point, I'm the kind of guy who says, I'm not an expert in anything. Because the more I learn about stuff, the more you realize how much there is to learn. Now you get to a point where you know a lot, and you have to start saying, well, at least I know a lot. I'm very comfortable doing very hard things in business and growing very quickly, not because of some false bravado, but because I've paid the price for 20 years, right? I've made the mistakes over time, and I realize I've made those mistakes and I've learned from them. And you get to the point where you feel very confident that you can be successful because you paid that price. So all of those times I worked at night and on weekends and I ground, I didn't worry about compensation. I mean, honestly, I was underpaid for a long time, but I was getting an education, right? And putting all the eggs I could in my basket so that I had future opportunities in front of me, and that has paid off. And we ended up staying in Utah, which cracks me up. All these opportunities were in Utah, which we love, and we've raised our kids here, and now we probably would never ever leave. So that's Candace International. So Marketing and Ally was a contact center. Metasource, I never said, is a BPO business process outsourcing. It is the most crazy, boring business you'll ever. It's like you don't even know people do that until you see it. You're like, oh, someone must do that. It's like a fractional penny transaction business where we ended up doing a lot of things through acquisitions, but at its core, we did data entry. So back in the day, you'd fill out like a rebate card and buy some batteries or whatever, and you fill out your rebate for $3 and mail that in, and someone mails you a $3 check. That doesn't happen anymore, but it used to. And you have your name and your address, some information on there. Well, somebody has to key that information in. When you go to the doctor and they fill out health claims, they're called HICVAs and UBs, and I know more boring detail about different businesses than you'd ever want to know. And you do high speed imaging, so you have like a scanner the size of a Hyundai, and you just have stacks of paper, and it's just flying through, and you're just creating all these images and dropping the backs if they're empty. And at that point, you could send it all over. So at Metasource, we had locations in China, India. We owned an office in Tijuana, Mexico, which was helpful because I spoke Spanish. And then obviously in the States, several domestic locations. At that point, you can send those images throughout the world. You can do the data entry very cost effectively. Another business we bought there was in the bust of '08, the housing bust. Some regulation came up where you had to audit a certain percentage of all the loans. So we got into that because that involved data entry. You had to identify the form. There's tons of different forms when you get a loan for a home. You identify what type of form it is, then key some information off of it. And then from there, a higher level service of aggregating that data and doing some algorithmic checks, right? Did you get too high of a loan for how much this person makes? That's a pretty simple one we didn't do until the bust. And some other things like that. So that kind of a boring business. Now, you go to K&S. So people would say, what do you do? And I honestly feel like I don't care what I'm doing. One was contact center, service center. One was BPO, pretty boring. You don't talk about that at parties. But I always felt like that's not really what we're doing. And this is going to sound trite, but I always tell people, what do? We make money. I don't really care. What's the business model? How can you run it more efficiently? How can you drive revenue? How can you cut your costs? We make money. Now, Candace International is a fun one to talk about because we do shoes. So, yeah, I'm wearing some shoes. That was fortunate. These are one of the men's shoes we make. This is called the Novak, crazy comfy. Women buy a lot more shoes than men, so we sell a lot of women's shoes. Journey collection with 2 E's at the end. That's the women's brand. And we design, we manufacture, and we drop ship. So I'm going to take a minute quickly to explain how that works. You go to Nordstrom.com, Target.com, JCPenney, Kohl's. There's lots of products for sale. A lot of those products are in their distribution centers or in their stores perhaps, and they'll ship them to you when you buy them online. Some of those products are offered by other companies who then drop ship. So I've got a warehouse in Draper. We've got 2 locations right now. We're actually moving this summer into a 250,000 square foot location where we'll have 3 million pairs of shoes, right? So if you want to say a closet with 3 million pairs of shoes, I take it to the warehouse. And we drop ship it directly. So you go on to, DSW, buy a pair of our shoes, that order electronically comes to us, it flows down to my warehouse, we pick it, we pack it, we stick it on the back of a UPS or a FedEx truck, and they take it to your door. So think about that model for a retailer. Retailers traditionally have a high cost of inventory, and they have a high risk of inventory. If that doesn't sell, they have to liquidate it. So they have to build into all their margins some inventory they're going to sell at cost or a loss or throw away. So what we do is we take that risk away, and they literally just list us on their site. Someone buys it, it costs them nothing, they collect the money, and then later they pay us a portion of it, and we ship it. So the sale to the customer is, do we fit the aesthetic of what your customer is buying? And we're kind of in that mid-tier, right? Purposefully, we try to be a value. So it doesn't matter what we charge for our shoes, as long as they're very comparable to someone who's charging more, then you're in a good place. So we take all the risk. We take the design risk. We take the inventory risk. we ship it, we pay for all that expense. And so as long as we meet what their customer is buying, and we convince them that we will protect their reputation, which means they'll get the right thing that they ordered, it won't be smashed, and they'll get it on time, or whatever the agreed time frame is. If we can convince them of those, there's like no reason for them to do it. Now it's a different model, so it's taken some education, but that's what we do. When I got there, we were probably 10 million. I got there 4 years ago. And we took on private equity right before I got there. And we recently recapitalized, now you know that word, last year with a new private equity group. And we're now about 75 million. And this year we're on track to do 90 million. And we're looking at some acquisitions that could probably in a year pump us to 135 million, let alone organic growth. So you can see you start to get this leverage where it starts to become a flywheel. If you want a good business book, good to great. It's a great business book. We talk about the flywheel, where it starts to turn in your favor, and it's hard to slow down. But it's taken a lot of work. Okay, now I'm running out of time, so I'm going to tell you what happened this morning, and maybe that'll bleed into Q&A. Let's see. A couple other points I want to hit. Yeah, go ahead.
Like, take your time. I think we're all shoe shopping now.
Yeah, no. Hey, buy the shoes. We love it.
Are those good shoes? They like have the plastic heel and they just pop back on?
No. That is a different. That's a. There might be some brand doing that, but I know what you're talking about.
I think that's called Kizik or something. Or what is?
Oh, the no. Yeah, you just pop in.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Those are different.
What is that?
Kizik, I think you're right. Something like that. I've seen some ads for it on TikTok or someplace. I don't know.
So
Okay. Okay, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Let me just make a couple other points. So it's taken me time to learn this, and I'm amazed that people have been in business a long time that don't know this. Business decisions, right? A problem hits, or you have to decide where to allocate your capital because you can't do everything, right? Executive management is not doing everything. It's deciding what not to do most of the time. I have limited resources and limited staff. Which things am I going to do, right? That's executive management. Doing everything all the time is magic. It's false. Business decisions are super easy to pick the right one or a good one. Super easy. What is hard is when presented with something, people want to make a decision right away. What you have to do is have the ability to know what you need to know in order to make that decision, and have the ability to go get those answers accurately. Get that information, get those facts. If you can slow your roll and think about it, what would I need to know clearly to make that decision correctly? And how do I go get that information in a timely manner? Once you've collected that information, the right information, you can see it all at once, the decision is almost always self-evident, right? But there's a balance between checking your emotion. We have to act. We have to act. Listen, the sun is never heading towards the earth. But then there's a balance between that and letting logic and reason unnecessarily delay your decision. Right? You can harm yourself by having no decision. But there's a sweet spot in the middle where you just slow your roll a little bit and you decide, what would I actually need to know to make this decision? And I'm telling you, that is a scarce skill. Not a lot of people can do that well. And then have the discipline and the patience to go get that information. Once you have that all in front of you, the decision is almost always like, oh yeah, it's obvious. Well, it's obvious now, right? Because you went and got the information. I'll see if I can come up with an example to help kind of settle that in, but hopefully that's meaningful. The other thing is, unless you're a technology company, technology for technology's sake does not help your business. So if you're inventing iPads for the first time, honestly, Steve Jobs didn't invent that. He took a bunch of stuff that existed and he put it together in a unique way that the consumer wanted, created an addressable market, and sold the crap out of it. And good for him. The technology companies are like biotech, and when they made the first processor chip, and those are technology companies. Now, every company uses technology, but people often think to themselves, they're going to solve a problem by buying something and installing it. There's a great book called Well Made in America. Harley Davidson, An American Story. That might be the whole title. I forget who wrote it. But there's a great lesson taught there. They have gone through ups and downs. I think this was back in the 70s. They were struggling and they were low on funds and they were looking at going out of business. And their processes in manufacturing were horrible. And they didn't have the money to write a check to solve it. The truth is a check would have put them out of business if they had the money. So it forced them to just slow their roll and look at it and get into some concepts of manufacturing. I can't get into it, but if you want another great book, go read The Goal. It is fantastic. It's about the theory of constraints. I make everyone who works for me read it. We read lots of books, but that's one for sure. And they figured out what their system looked like, where their bottleneck was, how to subordinate everything in the bottleneck, and get that manufacturing humming. And later they said, when we were successful and had money, we were able to then buy technology that then automated the processes that we manually figured out and did. Had we had the money to spend back then, we would have put ourselves out of business. If you automate a bad process, it leverages up all the bad outcomes, right? So go read Well Made in America if you want a book to read. It's a pretty quick one, and you'll see that lesson. But do things manually first, and it doesn't have to be a year, but you learn so much. The reason technology projects go over budget and over expense is because people think of them as technology projects, and they are not. They're business projects that you're using a screwdriver and a hammer that we call technology to build. So think of it this way. If you have two carpenters, one guy can use a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver to build an ugly box that he sticks in the back of his truck to store stuff in. And another guy could use the same tools and the same wood to create the most ornate, awesome, custom carpentry in your home, right? So was it the screwdriver? Was it the wood? Was it the hammer? No, he had a plan. He knew what he was gonna do. He had the experience, and he turned it into like this awesome built-in cabinetry versus my 4-year-old doing something with a screwdriver, right? So the tool is not what's doing it. Understand what your business plan is first. Okay, okay, great. Okay, so I told you a little bit about the business. So we have this customer. This is a joke. If it wasn't for customers' employees, business would be easy. We have this customer who we've been doing work for a long time. Great customer. They're our biggest customer. We had a meeting this morning that came out of the blue where they were unhinged, frothy. So let me back up. When you get an order from a customer, you have an agreed SLA for ship time. So hey, I got this order with this ship method at this day and this time. So from there you can calculate, well, when does that due? Due for us means when do I have to put it on the truck to then go into the shipping network to go to the house. So you have a certain amount of time. That could be same day, that could be 48 hours, whatever. And we've been on time, almost 100% for years with that. We think. So this morning, they're unhinged. They're coming up with numbers that don't even make sense. On average, it's 15 days from click to porch. And, there's this high level of cancellations we have to deal with because it takes so long to ship. And like their numbers literally don't make any sense. We're like, okay, clearly this is an issue and we are going to address it. So that's another good lesson. Even when people are crazy, the best way to disarm them, even if you don't agree with them, is just validate them. So you're right. That's all they really want to hear at the beginning. They can't get into detail or conversation until you validated them. Clearly this is an issue and we're going to take it seriously and this is going to be corrected. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you're crazy. I can't tell you that. So they're telling us these numbers. We're like, okay, hey, let's look at some examples. Do you have one order that falls into this? And let's just go look at it and see what happened. And then from there, we can come up with a plan. Well, I don't have any of that detail. And some other stuff that didn't even seem to relate to us. But there was ultimatums, like, you got to give us this much money to make up for our cost for this that you guys have caused. And you got to ship all the time and same day shipping and blah, blah, blah. And so now, from the things I've said, what do you do? Like, it doesn't make sense. I got salespeople and account managers running around with like chickens with their heads cut off. Oh, we gotta do something. Ah! What do you want to do? I don't know. We gotta do something. And like all these ideas come up. And you have to keep focusing people. I agree, even internally. we are now going to do something. Hey, what does good look like? We're here, and we'd like to be here. Let's describe this. What does good look like? What is an end result we're all happy with? Can we articulate that? If we can't, it's pretty hard to decide what direction to walk in, what levers to pull. Okay, so let's start there. Because if we just do all of these things, we've now convinced ourselves that we're getting here. We don't even know what here is. And so a lot of time and effort focused on this instead of what we should be focused on. And in the end, we think we've accomplished something, but we probably haven't. And the customer's still going to be upset, right? So this goes back to like, okay, what are the facts? So now I'm going through and pulling some information, working with the carrier, getting the weighted average days in transit for their packages. What's the weighted average days in handling time on our side before we ship it? I can take those two together for everything we've shipped this year and say, hey, you know, the weighted average is 6.5 days from click to delivery. Can you help us understand where we're wrong and look at your data and find out where the miscommunication is? That then like softens them and opens the door. And I've been through this so many times. I'm telling you, by the end, we're going to get to the point where they realize they were wrong. They're looking at it wrong. Because I'm telling you, I can look at an order right now. That's just not the case. But you still have this call where it's this oh crap moment, and we'll stop carrying your stuff all right now. We don't care, and this and that. So you can fight them. You can knee-jerk reaction and try to just make a lot of noise and motion. Or you can slow your roll and say, okay, what information would I need to know to both verify what's going on and to know what action I took would have this outcome and actually get me here that I've now pre-described what good looks like. And then, you know, by the end of today, I'm going to have 90% of the information. I identify what would I need to know. Let me go get that information. And then you make a decision, what are we going to do from here? Now, in reality, we're moving more and more towards a 7-day ship time. And we're going to do that. This will probably escalate that effort, and every customer will benefit from it. But you go from this like, oh crap moment, like, oh, I just want to give up, to some kind of way to systemically address this issue. And by the end, the best result is the customer went from mad to, man, these guys are good guys. They heard me. They acted quick. They care about my business and my customer. I'd never leave these guys. Right? It's like getting a hair in your food. That can either end poorly, or the restaurant, for $8 of their cost, can say, that is totally unacceptable. I apologize for that hair. That shouldn't have happened. We're gonna go back and look and see how that happened. We totally comped this meal. Let me give you dessert. I went from like, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever had to, I'm coming back here. This is a great restaurant, right? So I don't know. I didn't leave you the time to say like what you would do, but we're getting close. I don't know if you want to ask questions about that situation or anything I said, or any questions in general. I'll do my best to address them.
So when you're looking at different companies to acquire, are you looking for companies that have been more successful, or are you looking for companies that are lacking and you know you can bring them up to speed?
Yes. There's different strategies for companies that you'll acquire. I'll tell you this, the easiest ones to do well with were the ones that were break even or losing money because you didn't have to convince them to change. Mm-hmm. They would relent to the fact that they had to change. They might not even agree with it, but they've been banging their head against the wall for years, and they're open to change. But to your point, to your question specifically, you might, so to stay at a high level, there's a thing called a tuck-in. So that company I told you about that was losing money every month, they did exactly what we do with the exact same customer. So that's a tuck-in. I just look at how much they're charging. Is their pricing right? I know I can make the rest of the margins work because I have that model. So that's kind of a tuck-in. So it's nice that they were losing money or break even because I pay a certain amount of money for that business. And I know right away I can get their margins to a certain point, which will then throw off cash, that then pays back my investment and then starts giving me a return. So that's a great business to buy. Some businesses you might buy that's doing very well and very profitable, but they are in a segment of the market that's related to you that you want to get into. And so you want to buy them. And that's more of a, you keep a lot of those people and maybe some of those locations. But there are still some overheads like accounting and IT that you get to get efficiencies on. And you all make a little more money, but you buy that for a different strategic reason. So depending on why you're buying companies and your strategy, you would go in different directions, right? And we did both, to be honest, a little both. Yeah. Let's see. Any others? Go ahead.
So some of this information that you're getting, you talked about, you've gotten it from the job as well as some books. Have there been other ways, like other information that you've
Yes.
been able to find that we could harness that you would like to share with us?
So that's a great question. In fact, I think I had a note there to try to say this, but I forgot. So you're here in school. That's good. Get all the education you can. I'm a big believer. Somebody has to pay you for your education. So make sure you get an education that somebody else wants to trade money with you for. That's a job. And then, so you 100% learn things in college that you will use in your career and in life. This is true. But the best thing you learn in college is how to learn. So you get good at assimilating information and researching and filling in the puzzle of your life. You learn a little bit more here, and it informs something over here you were learning, and you didn't realize you put a connection together. These things could be related, and I could combine them in a unique way to have success. So you learn how to learn in college. So continue to learn. So I know lots of stuff now that no one ever taught me. People just figured, I hear it all the time. Oh, you're so smart. How do you know these things? I don't, but I don't tell myself that I can't figure it out, right? People think I'm like a technical wizard. I know how to use Google, and I haven't told myself I can't figure it out. So then I go figure it out, and I'm willing to try and fail. Try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. Well, I know that I found 10 ways that doesn't work. So that's success. Oh, the 11th one worked. So that was 10 successes of failure, and then a success of success, right? So just keep learning. So one example, I'm really good at Excel. Yeah, in college, I think we had some Excel class, but remember I was working full time and I taught myself Excel before I ever had the college class. And I think I probably tested out of it because honestly, the Excel depth they go into in a college class, God bless college, it's not that deep. So I bought myself Excel for Dummies, like literally Excel for Dummies. I bought myself SQL Server for Dummies and writing queries for dummies and just read that thing. That's not the most exciting thing, but I read it, I tried, I learned, it teaches you how to think a different way. I look at problems differently. So find things you're interested in, find problems you see out there, and don't wait for someone to spoon feed it to you. Just go learn about it. And I'm telling you, now compared to then, I don't want to sound like the old guy. Like I literally had to use encyclopedias in school, right? Like you had to go to the library where your parents bought a set, and that data is aging, right? You owned it for 20 years. Who knows how right it is anymore? You know, there's so many options. There are free, I think Harvard gives free classes online you can take. There's the Khan Academy if you ever want to learn stuff there. There's so many resources to go learn stuff. Just insatiably have a need to learn, regardless if you're being paid for it. Believe me, you're being paid for it. Then you'll find opportunities wherever you're working to excel and make that business better. And I'm telling you, if it's a good business, they will see it and just get out of your way. Just make us better. Keep helping us. And if they don't, there's lots of businesses. Go somewhere else. That's a good answer or not, but I've read a lot of books, and you know I enjoy that. And I people who work for me, I've read some books 10 times because I'll go reread them with people, and I learn something from them every time. The other piece of advice might be, this has changed a little, I think, over the years, but this part of it hasn't. 99% of the people want to help. Ask for it. Be respectful of people's time, but when you go to someone, if someone came to me and said, I see where you are now, I would like to be there. These are the things I think I should do. Can you help me? Can you answer this question? Can you consult me? Of course. What do I care? It's no skin on my nose, right? Ask people for help. Find people that are in an area you want to be. I have my kids work at jobs, and I tell, like, I've got some buddies that own some businesses, and some of my kids have worked there. And I've told them, I don't need you to pay them. And my kids don't love that. But I don't care if they get paid. What are you going to save a couple grand as a 13-year-old and buy candy? Like I'm feeding you every day. You're okay. but that lets them do a job that they otherwise might not be able to get, right? I had a college professor, made a bunch of money in California at BYU. He wanted to teach at BYU and move back, but he only had a master's degree. He didn't have a PhD. You have to have a PhD to teach at some colleges. And he tried. He said, no, he has a PhD. He has a PhD. So then he exited this business, made a bunch of money, and he went to BYU and said, how about this? Put me on the insurance and pay me $1. And I will teach Econ 101. It's like the first level econ class that probably the professors in the department don't want to teach. All of a sudden, you didn't have to be a PhD. And he got the job he wanted. He learned a lot from it, but he went and kind of worked for free. Now, I get it. He was in a position, he made a bunch of money. And I'm not saying you can live your life and never make any money, but the concept is still true. I don't like my kid's really into locksmithing. I can go down the street and say, hey, can I get my kid a job there? And they might not be hiring. But then if I say, hey, he'll work for free. All of a sudden, there's a job opening. And you go in and you grind and you do the work they ask you to do, and you look around and you do the work they didn't ask you to do. And all of a sudden, they love you. And it's like, we can't lose this kid. We should start paying him. But honestly, whether we paid him or not, I don't care. Because they install networking. I don't know if he'll ever be a networking guy. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff about networking. And you're going to learn a bunch of stuff about how security works. And that might spark your career. It might not. It might help you learn something else. But if he goes in for free or not worry about the tit for tat on compensation, I'm telling you, the compensation will come. There's so much money in this world. If you'll just stay interested and aggressive and work hard, you will be rewarded. It's there. That people are needed so badly. I don't want to get into politics, but if you look at the birth and death rates around the world, people would change their mind on immigration.